Celtics. Shockwave. The Jaylen Brown fallout, Giannis secrets, and what's next? Surprised. They told you the Jaylen Brown trade was just business. They told you it was cap management. They told you it was asset optimization. They lied. Because what Jason Tatum just said publicly about losing his brother, his 10-year partner in crime, the man he built 2 finals runs and a championship with, is not the story of a front office making a smart basketball decision. Size. It's the story of a locker room that got blown up from the inside, and the last man standing is finally telling us why. And that's not even the wildest part. Because buried underneath the Jaylen Brown headlines is a report that changes how we understand this entire offseason. A report about Giannis Antetokounmpo, a max extension that never happened, and a decision that Boston's front office is now being accused of getting completely catastrophically wrong. Shouting, the Jaylen Brown earthquake. Let's start with the story that's dominating every Celtics group chat, every sports radio show, and every fan forum in Boston right now. Jaylen Brown is officially a Philadelphia 76er. Take a second and actually sit with that sentence, because if you told Celtics fans this was coming 3 years ago, they would have laughed you out of the room. This is the same Jaylen Brown who was the Finals MVP, the same Jaylen Brown who hit the shot heard around Boston to close out a championship run, the same Jaylen Brown who, alongside Jason Tatum, formed one half of what many considered the best young duo in basketball, and now he's wearing red, white, and blue for a division rival. So how did we get here? According to reporting that's been circulating out of Boston, the writing was on the wall the moment the front office explored trading Brown to Milwaukee for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Think about what that means for a second. The Celtics were willing to move Brown, a max-salary all-star caliber wing who had literally just won them a championship, for a chance at an even bigger superstar. And once that offer was on the table, once Brown found out his own franchise was shopping him for an upgrade, the relationship became, in the words being used around the league, untenable. You can't unring that bell. Once a player knows his team views him as a trade chip in a bigger game, the trust is gone. It doesn't matter what happens next, whether the Giannis trade goes through or not, the damage to that relationship is permanent, and that's exactly what we saw play out. Now here's where it gets emotional, because Jason Tatum, the one guy left holding this together, finally broke his silence. And what he said wasn't the usual, "we wish him the best" corporate spin that players are trained to give reporters. Tatum spoke about this as what it actually was, the end of an era he didn't choose to end. For 10 seasons, Tatum and Brown weren't just teammates. They were the engine of an entire era of Celtics basketball. They grew up together in that locker room. They took the beatings together in those early playoff exits against Miami. They matured together into 2 of the best two-way wings the league has seen in the last decade. And they finally broke through together, hoisting a banner that Boston fans will remember forever. Now Tatum has to walk into that same locker room, under that same Joe Mazzulla, and build something new, without the guy who was there for every single step of the journey up to this point. And listen, we have to talk about the ESPYs moment too, because this is where things got even more real. At the ESPYs, in front of cameras, in front of the entire basketball world, Tatum was asked directly about Brown, about the trade, about what it's like moving forward. This wasn't a quiet locker room interview after a random regular season game. This was a national stage, and Tatum had to process very real, very raw emotions in real time, on camera, for millions of people to see. Radio hosts across Boston have been dissecting every word of that response for days now, because how Tatum handles this, publicly and privately, is going to set the tone for this entire Celtics rebuild. Here's the uncomfortable truth that Celtics fans need to hear. This isn't just a basketball transaction. This is a divorce. And like every divorce, there's going to be an adjustment period where things feel weird, where the fit isn't quite right, where the team has to relearn its own identity without one of its 2 foundational pieces. The question now isn't whether Boston made a mistake. The question is whether what they got in return and what they're building around Tatum going forward is actually going to be worth the heartbreak. And there's another layer to this that a lot of casual fans are missing. This wasn't just about 2 players in a front office. This was about an entire era of Boston basketball culture getting rewritten in real time. Every young player in that Celtics locker room right now grew up watching Tatum and Brown define what it meant to wear that jersey. Every coaching decision Mazzulla makes this season is going to be filtered through the lens of, how do we replace what we just lost? That's not something you fix with one trade or one press conference. That's a multi-year process, and Boston fans need to brace themselves for some growing pains along the way. And that brings us to the next story, because there's a reason this trade even happened in the first place, and it's not the reason you think, the Giannis bombshell. Okay, so here's where this story gets genuinely wild, because for months, the assumption around the league was simple. The Celtics wanted Giannis Antetokounmpo, they made a run at him, it didn't work out, and Jaylen Brown became collateral damage in the process. Simple story, right? Front office swings big, misses, someone gets hurt along the way. That's basketball, except that's not actually what happened. And the real version of events is honestly more interesting and more controversial than the simplified version fans have been repeating for weeks. According to a detailed report that's been making the rounds, the idea that Boston passed on offering Giannis a max contract extension purely because of money never actually made sense in the first place, and now we're getting the real explanation for what actually killed that potential blockbuster deal. Let that sink in. This wasn't a story about the Celtics being cheap or about ownership refusing to spend or ping-ponging around a luxury tax bill. This was something deeper, something about roster fit, about timeline, about whether pairing a 30-something Giannis with a Tatum-led core actually made basketball sense 5 years down the road, not just next season. And this is honestly where a lot of the outside noise about the Celtics has been getting it wrong. There's a whole media narrative floating around suggesting that Boston disrespected Jaylen Brown in the way this whole saga was handled, that leaks, trade rumors, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering damaged his reputation and standing around the league before the deal even happened. But when you actually pull back the curtain on how these front office conversations really went, that narrative starts to look less like journalism and more like a hot take built for clicks. The Celtics front office was doing what every single contending team in this league does, exploring every possible avenue to build a sustainable winner. That's not disrespect. That's the job. Here's what fans need to understand about how this actually played out. Boston's front office was staring at a genuine dilemma. Keep the championship core exactly as it was and hope Father Time is kind to it, or make an aggressive move that could either elevate the ceiling of this team into true dynasty territory or blow the whole thing up trying. They chose to explore the aggressive path. The Giannis conversation happened. It didn't result in Giannis actually walking through the door, but it did result in Jaylen Brown walking out of it, landing in Philadelphia as the return piece in a deal that also reportedly involved Paul George coming back the other way to Boston. So now the real debate begins, and it's a debate that's splitting the fan base right down the middle. Some fans are looking at this trade, Jaylen Brown out, Paul George in, and calling it an unmitigated disaster. A former Finals MVP for an aging oft-injured wing, that's the trade people are furious about. But other fans and some sharper basketball analysts are pushing back hard on that framing. They're pointing out that everyone assumes Philadelphia clearly won this trade, but if you actually dig into term length, contract structure, positional fit, and what both franchises are trying to build over the next 3 years, the conventional wisdom might be completely backwards. There's a real argument that Philadelphia is about to find out the hard way that this trade comes with far more risk than reward. Think about it from a pure value standpoint. Jaylen Brown, for all his talent, has had his own share of durability questions and playoff shooting inconsistencies over the years. Paul George, when healthy, is still one of the most versatile two-way wings this league has ever produced. A guy who can guard multiple positions, stretch the floor, and take pressure off a primary scorer like Tatum. The problem, of course, is that when healthy qualifier, and that's the tightrope Boston is walking right now. But here's the thing that should actually worry both fan bases. Neither the Celtics nor the Sixers currently look like a clear title favorite coming out of this deal, which means the biggest loser from the Jaylen Brown trade might not even be decided yet. It's going to be determined by what happens in the actual standings this coming season. So buckle up, because this rivalry between Boston and Philadelphia just got a whole lot more personal. Mazzulla goes viral, the MMA tape. Now let's shift gears for a second, because while all of this front office chaos has been unfolding, there's been a completely different kind of Celtics story going viral, and this one is a lot more fun. Joe Mazzulla, already one of the most unpredictable, eccentric personalities coaching in the NBA today, just gave fans a look into exactly how he prepares his mind for the grind of an NBA season. And it involves punching pads. A clip has been circulating showing Mazzulla deep in an MMA training session, working the pads with real intensity, real technique, and honestly, real intent. This isn't a guy dabbling in a fitness fad for Instagram content. This looks like someone who has genuinely integrated combat sports discipline into how he prepares to lead a professional basketball team, and NBA fans were not ready for it. The reactions across social media ranged from stunned to impressed to genuinely a little intimidated. Because, let's be honest, when you picture an NBA head coach's off-season training regimen, you're usually picturing film study, whiteboard sessions, maybe some golf. You are not picturing your coach getting after it in a legitimate striking session. But if you followed Mazzulla's career at all, this actually tracks perfectly with who he is. This is a coach who has never shied away from unconventional methods, blunt honesty in press conferences, and a philosophy that borrows heavily from military and combat mentality, mental toughness, discipline under pressure, controlled aggression. And Mazzulla himself has spoken about exactly why he trains this way. He's talked openly about how the mental framework from combat sports, staying composed when you're getting hit, making calculated decisions under real physical and psychological pressure, directly translates to how he wants his team to operate in the fourth quarter of a playoff game when the other team is making a run. Think about what that actually means heading into this season. This is a Celtics team dealing with a massive roster shakeup, a fractured relationship with a former franchise cornerstone, and a brand new co-star in Paul George who's walking into a completely different culture than the one he left behind. If there was ever a year where Boston needed a head coach with an unshakable mental framework, it's this one. Say what you want about Mazzulla's press conference one-liners or his sometimes bizarre answers to reporters, but this is a coach who is clearly building a program, not just drawing up plays. And in a season where Boston's identity is being rewritten in real time, that mental foundation might end up being more valuable than any single roster move. If Mazzulla can get this fractured roster to buy into that same mentality, stay composed, absorb the hits, keep moving forward, that MMA training tape might end up looking less like a viral clip and more like a preview of exactly how this Celtics team plans to survive its toughest season in years. Summer League signals what the young core showed us. Let's close things out with a story that got a lot less national attention than the Jaylen Brown trade, but might actually matter more for Boston's long-term future. The Celtics wrapped up their scheduled Las Vegas Summer League slate with a win, taking down the Sacramento Kings in a game that, on paper, means nothing in the standings, but tells us a whole lot about where this franchise's young talent pipeline actually stands. With so much of the veteran core in flux, Brown gone, George in, the whole rotation getting reshuffled, Boston's ability to develop internal talent has never mattered more. And this Summer League run gave fans a real look at some of the names who could be filling minutes on this roster sooner than anyone expected. Guys like Hugo Gonzalez and Chris Senac got real run in Vegas, and the buzz coming out of those practices and games has been genuinely positive. Gonzalez in particular has been mentioned repeatedly by people around the organization as a potential X-factor heading into his second year, someone who could help offset some of the two-way production Boston is losing with Brown out the door. And then there's Chris Senac Jr., Boston's first-round pick, who's already arriving with a clear message to the fan base. He's not satisfied being a project. Rookies who show that kind of competitive edge before they've even played a real NBA minute are exactly the type of young pieces a rebuilding contender needs. Here's why this matters so much more than usual. In a normal offseason, Summer League performances are a nice bonus, fun previews, low stakes, nothing that really shifts the bigger picture. But this isn't a normal offseason for Boston. This is a franchise that just lost one of its two franchise cornerstones, and every single young player who shows real development this summer is one less hole the front office has to fill through outside additions. Boston also made a series of quieter roster moves that flew under the radar compared to the blockbuster headlines, locking in some of their most promising undrafted prospects from that Summer League roster to exhibit 10 contracts. It's not a splashy move. It's not going to trend on social media. But building genuine roster depth from the ground up, especially in a year of this much upheaval, is exactly the kind of unglamorous work that determines whether a rebuild actually sticks the landing. So, while the entire basketball world is still fixated on the Jaylen Brown fallout and the Giannis what-ifs, keep one eye on Vegas. Because the players who quietly outworked expectations there might be the difference between a rough transition season and a genuinely competitive one. So let's bring this all together, because this has been one of the most consequential off-seasons in recent Celtics memory. Jaylen Brown is gone, and the emotional weight of that decision is only now becoming clear through Jason Tatum's own words. The Giannis pursuit that supposedly caused all of this wasn't the simple story we were originally told. It was a calculated, complicated front office gamble that changed the entire trajectory of this franchise. Joe Mazzulla is building a mental foundation through some genuinely unconventional methods, and it might be exactly what this fractured roster needs. And quietly, in the background, Boston's young talent pipeline is showing real signs of life at exactly the moment the franchise needs it most. Here's my honest take. This Celtics team is not the same team that hoisted that banner. It might not even be a top 4 team in the East on paper right now, but franchises get rebuilt in moments like this, in the uncomfortable, messy, emotional transitions that fans hate living through in real time. The next few months are going to tell us everything. How Tatum leads a locker room without his co-star for the first time in a decade. Whether Paul George can stay healthy and actually deliver on his two-way promise, whether Mazzulla's culture can hold a fractured roster together, and whether that young core we just saw in Vegas is ready to take a real leap. I want to hear from you though. Do you think Boston made the right call letting Jaylen Brown walk, or is this going to be the trade this front office regrets for years? Drop your take in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'll be pinning the best takes for this video. If this breakdown helped you understand exactly what's going on with your Celtics right now, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more Celtics fans who need to see this. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, because we've got a lot more Celtics coverage coming as this season approaches, and you do not want to miss it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.